But it wasn't just, do we have, I think there's some other footage of Albanese getting bailed up by some protesters who are pretty upset because the government is kicking in, the taxpayer is kicking in a couple $100 million to pay for a new AFL stadium in Hobart, when some of the locals think there are other concerns. Have a look at this. So isn't this fascinating, guys? We are starting to see Albanese attacked not from the right, but from the left, because there's a huge homelessness, housing, rental crisis in Tasmania, as there is across much of the country. And these people, I think it's really quite a reasonable question. Why are we spending? I mean, crisis aside, why are you spending, $200 million on a new stadium in Hobart?
It's the same questions that Gladys Berejiklian had to face year in, year out in Sydney. It's a perfectly legitimate question, as James said, to ask if you're spending taxpayers' money, is a stadium your best priority? What's it going to give back to the taxpayer? So what we are seeing is a Prime Minister who is looking increasingly out of touch. I mean, we saw all the nonsense with the tennis, where he spent a couple of hours in Alice Springs, where he is needed, and then dashed off to the tennis where he wasn't needed and spent several days eating ice creams and watching famous tennis players. He's starting to be the Prime Minister who likes to rub shoulders with the celebs and the glitterati. Not really a classic Labor position, is it, Rita?
Well, I think we're soon going to hear again about how he grew up at a housing commission flat with his... we're going to hear the whole backstory.
Seems to have been forgotten.
To humanise him, to bring him back to his humble roots. But you're right, he is being attacked from the left. We saw Adam Bandt at the press club this week, again attacking him from the left, saying he was becoming right-wing. This is the socialist left faction of the Labor Party this Prime Minister's from. But no, in the eyes of Adam Bandt, and Adam Bandt is pushing for all sorts of crazy stuff, James. We're talking about rent freezes. He wants all sort of negative gearing conditions pulled back. Essentially, Marxism is what he's advocating for.
Well, Rita, the Greens might be advocating for some sort of socialist Marxism, but what Albo is really morphing into is a corporatist. Because if you look at some of the news stories this week about housing, number one, big tax breaks for big companies that want to do these build to rent sort of things. So more corporate landlords, fewer individual landlords. We saw the story in the Weekend Australia this weekend about how mum and dad landlords are selling up because of all the anti-landlord restrictions. So what's happening here? Well, the Albanese government is saying we want to normalise renting, because renters are much more likely to vote Labor, and we want them to rent not from individuals who are buying property to build wealth, but from big corporations that we can deal with, regulate, and control in a much different fashion. This is an unwinding of the Hawke-Keating-Howard settlement, and it is back to this old corporatist Australia. It's very sinister. This is where Albanese is going, and this is what people need to watch out for.
Let's not forget corporatism, left-wing corporatism. I'm not accusing Albanese of being a fascist, but fascism grew out of this merger of hardcore left-wing governments getting into bed with big corporations, pushing aside the small business people, pushing aside the young entrepreneur, and this sweet deals between big corporations, big governments, and then the real poison in the mix is when you throw in big tech into that. And that's the kind of dangerous world that we're seeing increasingly coming about. Rita.
Can we talk about it?
It's absolutely destructive. You're essentially taking away the ability of everyday people, everyday wage earners, to build wealth, to build some sort of financial security for themselves. Property is a means of doing that for so many. You look at who invests in property, who negatively gears. They're overwhelmingly middle-class Australians, ordinary people, teachers, police officers, and so on. And yes, the conditions have become terrible for them. It's not just the interest rate increases that we've seen, 10 of them, but it's all the state taxes. You've got land tax every year. You've got all the costs going up, and then all these onerous conditions put on. In Victoria, if you've got, say, I don't know, a property where it's not suitable to have a dog, you can't tell a prospective tenant you can't have a dog. You've got to go to VCAT and get permission to tell the tenant you can't have a dog for your own property. So, of course, mum and dad investors are getting out of the market. They're putting their money elsewhere. And that makes it bad for renters. That's why we've got a rental shortage and rents are going up.